Chad Callan usually spends most of his time working in a lab at Hawaii's Oceanic Institute on projects aimed at preserving increasingly dwindling coral reefs. But today he's taking to the water in Oahu's Hanauma Bay Coral Reef Reserve.
The nice thing about Hanauma Bay right here is that it's a protected environment as far as fishing goes. So the fish that are here are in really nice condition.
Callan points out a type of fish he's especially familiar with, the yellow tang. Yellow tang can live up to 40 years, and they're more than just spectacular to look at. They're also herbivores and play an important role by eating algae that can choke reefs. Now, a project that could be vital to the yellow tang's survival is in trouble.
The yellow tang in particular is the signature fish for the Hawaii reef system. You see a yellow tang in virtually every aquarium everywhere in the world, and almost all of them came from Hawaii.
Charles Laidley recently came on board as the curator of the Waikiki Aquarium. He's also world-renowned in the field of aquaculture. Laidley is considered an expert in figuring out new approaches that lead to breakthroughs in breeding techniques, like the ones he pioneered with these moi fish on display at the aquarium. For the last 13 years, Laidley has been trying to crack the code of what he calls his biggest challenge: how to breed yellow tang in captivity.
What we found very early on, the real challenge amongst many, is that they produce an incredibly small pelagic egg. These fish hatch into larvae that are so small, they live in a world dominated by forces of surface tension and pressure and turbulence that can literally kill these fish. They can literally rip the larvae apart if they get caught in the surface film.
In Hawaii, the yellow tang are most plentiful on the Big Island. Those higher numbers also attract aquarium divers. The divers are part of a $1 billion plus ornamental fish trade. Yellow tang typically fetch around $35 from hobbyists, though the divers are paid much less. Except in areas set aside for protection, there's no limit to the number of yellow tang that commercial divers can take out of Hawaiian waters. Critics say the lack of any limit sometimes leads to unethical practices. As evidence, they point to the 500-plus yellow tang found in a dumpster in 2010 by state officials in Kona. Laidley stays clear of the politics around the aquarium trade, but he says research on breeding fish like the yellow tang could one day make current practices obsolete.
So if you look at the freshwater trade, it used to be all wild collected. Now they're 99+% captive reared. I would argue that it's time that we stop depending solely on extraction from the wild and develop an alternative, and a sustainable, economically, environmentally viable alternative is going to be captive production.
This is where Laidley and his team have worked for 13 years trying to unravel the mysteries of yellow tang breeding. Hawaii Pacific University's Oceanic Institute on Oahu's windward side. The biggest breakthrough for the research project was when they figured out the type of tiny microscopic creatures called copepods that the larvae would eat.
So these eggs hatch into little pelagic larvae, and they have about 3 days to find this microscopic food. Even the larvae are so small that if I showed it to you in a beaker, you'd probably say, I don't see anything there. They're only about 1.5 millimeters to 2 millimeters in length, and they're transparent, and they've got little tiny mouths. And the food items we were selecting for are somewhere in the kind of 50 to 70 micron range.
Finding the right food got them farther than any other rigorously scientifically documented yellow tang breeding project has ever gone before. Chad Callan is one of the principal researchers on the yellow tang project.
And where we actually got them to was the first 3 weeks of life. So we got them through the first 21 days of their larval stage. And we think that their larval stage is probably somewhere between 60 and 90 days. So there's still quite a ways to go before they settle out as little juvenile yellow tang. But that critical first feeding stage is where most of the mortality occurs. And so the fact that we got a good number of them through that first critical stage is really a huge milestone.
Ocean research projects used to largely depend on one of the peculiarities of federal funding, the often maligned earmark. The late Senator Dan Inouye at one point championed the Yellow Tang Project using the funding mechanism, but following a congressional backlash against earmarks, the Yellow Tang Project has had to scramble for funding.
At the end, I think I had 12 grant programs all supporting this research. So we had people working on commercial hatchery that also helped develop this technology. We had work on people doing environmental surveys. We had people working on live feeds production systems. We had people working on the brood stock. All these different grant sources were coming together to fund us, and we're very grateful.
For now, despite recent breakthroughs, the yellow tang breeding project is on hiatus. Tanks which once were filled with yellow tang larvae stand empty. Chad Callan watches over the algae lab, which has bubbling cultures of algae. The cultures will one day, hopefully, feed thousands of emerging yellow tang. Callan says despite the financial setbacks, he still believes in the project.
It definitely is frustrating to get to the point where you've seen a significant achievement and then you have to stop because the funding isn't there anymore. But because of the progress we've made, we're encouraged that we'll be able to continue this research and make those next steps that are necessary. And protecting this environment is what we really want to do. And we believe that culturing these fish is one way to help preserve the coral reef environment.
No one in science has yet been able to reproduce what nature has done miraculously and routinely with a yellow tang. Chad Callum says he is confident he can help crack the code and be able to raise the fish to maturity in 2 to 3 years. That is, if the money can be found. For Honolulu Civil Beat, I'm Joe Rubin.